Okay, great. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue from last week. It was really, it's an amazing chapter. It's teaching us the secret on how to be able to direct ourselves to the essence of God Almighty. When we pray, we want to be able to pray to the essence of God Almighty, and um, what we started to learn is how to do that, and really it's about the concept of Tzimtzum. We spoke about and how everything in front of him is almost like as if it doesn't exist. And we spoke about it before, but now we started to give metaphor, and I was looking at it again I was looking at it again, and there's really we started the first metaphor. There's really five metaphor. Some of them are new and some of them are old, and we're revisiting the old metaphor and seeing it in a totally different light to be able to understand the concept of tzimtzum and how to direct our prayers and our requests directly to the essence of God. So I'm gonna look inside. I'm gonna show you the Sefer, the holy book that I'm learning from, and we're gonna. I hope we can figure this out. How I can change. Actually, I know how to do it. Um, 1 second. I'm going to um, make it go down, and then there must be a way to change. Okay, here we are. Second. This is where we are. Okay. I hope you can see this clearly. Yes, 1 second. This is not actually supposed to be here. Second. Yeah, oh, that's right. Yes, this is where we started learning, chapter 12. And where is the full stop? Yes, here we are. Okay, so the first metaphor is that the world is basically, I'm going to use the metaphor of you have a person who writes an article, an investigative journalist. He writes an article and he gives footnotes, and he gives a title to the article, and in the title is hinted everything in the article, including all the complicated footnotes. So when you look at the world, it's just like a title, and all we see is just all we see is a title, a few words. But the writer of the article, in the title, they see the entire article with all the footnotes and all the details. And they could have spent, a long time writing this article and making it, making sure that it's all accurate and a lot of details, intricate details. So the same thing, a similar idea is the way Jewish law is set up, is that there's a Mishnah, and a Mishnah was written by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, or his name is Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, and he didn't write it. He just collected all the concise laws together into 6 books, and the entire discussion of the Talmud of 20 volumes. You could spend a week, spend longer learning one side of a page in the Talmud with all the details, and so it ends up that the laws, there's the intricate laws of the Mishnah. They could have pages and pages and pages and hours of discussion just based on one line of the Mishnah, and the law is hinted in the wording of the Mishnah. So the same thing. So this is, so I gave you one metaphor, the metaphor of the journalist. Then I give you the metaphor that he's bringing down, the Mittel Rebbe is bringing down over here. So now, what's a lesson? That when God creates the world, there's really much more to it. All we're seeing is just like the one-liner, and God sees there's much more, and but we only see what's face value. So that helps us understand that, and it's really, and it's here. Everything's hidden over here. So just because we see a limited world, there's really much more. There's really the essence of God is here right now. We just don't see it, but He does. So therefore, if you are only seeing a minuscule amount from the what's really going on, so focus on the essence. Go where, focus on the essence. Recognize that something much greater over here. Now we're going to give the second of the Ofen Mashal base, the second metaphor, and we've seen this metaphor, and it was actually the third metaphor in the when we were learning about before Tzimtzum. But this time, now this same metaphor is going to become the second metaphor. Machayis hanefesh b'guf. This life of the soul, how it gives life to a body. Gam kein oila al derech hanal. And we can learn this metaphor to teach the same lesson as above. Vuhu b'yais, and this is because shekadei sheyishtane machaya ruchni shebe'etzem hanefesh l'chaya basar. In order for there to be a transformation from a spiritual life force that the soul is, in the soul of the in the essence of the spiritual soul, to a flesh like life. Hutrach lies bechinas halam v'kivutz ha'er. One second, it's falling. Change it. There has to be, the life of the soul has to hide itself, and the kivutz means, it's sort of like you take a sponge and you squash out a sponge. So basically, the light has to be like squished. Shel nefesh of the soul, mitchila, before it can go and start enlivening the body. See, our body is just like a puppet. We think it's a machine, but it's actually a puppet. There's actually, the reason why our body is able to function is because there's a soul. And we cannot compare the quality of the soul to the body. In other words, the soul is something much, much greater, but it has to be focused in order to be able to get into the body. However, the soul does get like impacted. It does get moved from what happens to the body. So there's a connection. Im kein gama agashmi achayis mischaber v'niskasha im atmusa. So therefore, also the physical light of the energy, the physical energy is connected to the atmusa, to the essence of the soul, haruchni, the spiritual one. And then he brings a metaphor, which we've mentioned before as a side note. It's almost like in brackets. Like physical growth that is connected to the spiritual growth. Now we think when we grow food in a, when you have a crop and you grow food, we think that's because we put the seed inside. Well, that's not the case. Most of the growth actually comes from the ground itself. Like if you would say, what is the contributing factor that actually makes a field grow? that is some sort of electromagnetic energy, or whatever you want to call it, that's in the ground in itself. And all that the seed does is that it taps in to the energy that's there. So, so if somebody would claim that they own the seed, or the patent on the seed, well, the person who actually owns the ground, they really 99%, that's really what's causing the food to grow. The contribution of the seed is very necessary, but it's very, very necessary, but it's really um, minuscule in comparison to the spiritual energy that's in the growth of the ground. I mean, think about it. You have a you have two parents. Of course, you need the husband, but without the mother's 9 months um, contribution, you wouldn't have a child. And who's growing the child? Well, it's God growing the child. We're not going to, ultimately, it's God that's growing the child. But you can't say that if somebody owns a seed, they own the crop. No, because the contribution of the ground is actually, and the spiritual contribution of the ground is actually what makes it happen. Now, that spiritual energy connects to the seed and to the actual plant. Now we're going back to the second metaphor. If a limb of the body, physical body, gets cut off, lo yechsar be'er v'chayes haruchnius shel ever zeh. There will be nothing missing from the spiritual energy of this sorry, hard to hold. There'll be nothing missing from the spiritual energy of this of this limb. In other words, if a person's missing a hand, the soul still has the energy of the hand there. It's just missing. We just don't have the vessel for it. But the person is going to experience as if they're going to feel as if they have a hand, even though there is no physical hand. But since the soul has a complete hand, that's why. So even if they're missing it, the soul is still there. And he brings a proof. I'll give you a proof from a person who cannot see. He gives birth to a child that can see. It's not because it's written in the DNA. It's because his soul, the soul of the father, has the ability to see, even though he doesn't have physical eyes, and that gets passed on to the child. Kiedua. And when the person is like missing a hand or a foot, God forbid, or their sight, only thing that's happening is that the spiritual ability to move a hand, spiritual ability to see, is hidden. V'yeshna, but it's right there. B'mitziyusei, in its existence. Chayfef al chayes agashmi is actually hovering on the physical energy shebeguf that's in the body. Nikra tzelamish, and the person is still considered the image of a man. In other words, even if they're missing something, they still have a complete image of the man, because the soul is complete. And Vahainu al derech hanal b'yadei shebehelam. Now he's going back and he's comparing it to the first metaphor, that the writer of the article, even if the reader only sees the headline, the writer of the article has knowledge of all the details of the article. Similar, if a great teacher is teaching a law from a Mishnah, and he has knowledge at this time of all the details of the Mishnah, all the detailed laws, even the student doesn't see it now. The student only sees like one line of the Mishnah. So too, if a person's missing so what happens? I didn't fully read the question that came on to my screen, but what happens, let's say if a person gets some genetic damage, their soul is still absolutely complete. And it's possible that through prayer, now it could be that the genetic damage that a person caused to their body causes that the soul cannot fully express itself because the vessel of the body is not compatible 100%, and therefore the body is damaged, like we see by certain people that get genetic damage. Um, so so what's going on over there? So the soul is 100% complete. It's just that sometimes the vessel doesn't match the soul. It's not an appropriate vessel for the soul because the code has been messed up. What they could do is ask for compassion. It's a difficult thing to ask for compassion for. They ask for compassion from God, to reconnect the soul to the body, even though it's not an absolute match. So the soul should be able to reveal itself in the body, even though the code is broken. It's sort of like asking a person who's missing a God forbid an eye, can I please still see? It's a tough one. It's a tough thing to ask for. So I guess it depends how much it's messed up. And they're going to say, like, so why did you put yourself in danger? You want us now to fix it, but why did you put yourself in danger in the first place? I mean, I'm sure if they ask enough things, ask for compassion, please connect my soul to my body anyways. I mean, it's gonna help. Just depends how much damage was done, because it's very hard to ask. If there's major damage, it's very hard to get a reparation on that. All these has been explained at length in another place. We're just teaching you the basics over here in short. Third metaphor, the fourth metaphor, but I'm saying that the power of growth with a seed, I'm going to say it's like part of the second metaphor. So I'm going to call this one the third metaphor. And last time, by the way, it was the second metaphor. So now we're looking at the power of movement, haruchnis, which is spiritual. When it comes and makes a physical move, the essence of the soul has to focus itself, but it still has a unlimited way of moving, potential of moving. It just decides to move in a specific way. So the unlimited potential is there, even though when a person decided to make a specific move, the unlimited potential is there. Vim calls nevertheless, the physical movement connects itself with the spiritual ability of the spiritual movement. So the soul sees it all, right? But the person only sees a certain move. We only see a certain move, but you should know that there's much more there. There's much more energy there that we can't see. So that's the idea of tzimtzum. There's much more over here than what we can see in the world. Much more, infinitely more. We can't even understand how much more there is over here. The Kai Gavna. So therefore we should address us. Why, put the address to the proper place when we pray to the essence of God. The Kahai Gavna Befanim Acherim, and similar metaphors in different ways. This is going to be the fourth metaphor. It's also a new one. So the first metaphor was a new one, and now the fourth metaphor is going to be a new one. K'may inyan his chakmus seichel prati mikeach hamaskel shaloi shesher alav behelam. So a specific intuitive invention um, or understanding from the power to think. Shishara Balhelam, the power to think is dwells on the person in a hidden way. So what you have around the brain, you have a liquid. And we used to think that, or at least we were taught that the reason why the liquid is there is because to cushion the brain. That's why if somebody gets a hit in the chin, the reason why people get knocked out because the brain collides with the skull and it overloads the brain. But small movements, there's this cushion that stops that happening. So small movements shouldn't be a problem because we have this liquid. But then in the 2000s, they realized that no, and this liquid around the brain seeps into the brain through a membrane, and it actually causes the growth of the nerves and the synapse. They start to connect to each other. That's when you're learning something new, it's very uncomfortable at first, and it takes you a long time because you're not used to that subject. But when you put a lot of effort into it, after a month or two, whatever, it becomes faster, it becomes easy. That's because the effort that a person does um, directs the brain to make new brain nerve connections. That the spark of the synapse shouldn't just fly from one nerve to another. There should be a physical um, connection of nerve for that subject. And I was reading in the article, they realized that the liquid around the brain helps those connections to happen, helps the nerves to grow and connect. And that's why when a person puts a lot of effort into a subject, they become much faster because they have physical hardware in their brain, which your nerves are set up to think about that idea very rapidly. Now, in this liquid, there's really the power of all ideas. The power of intellectual comprehension and ideas, it's in this liquid. It's called Kayach HaMaskal, the power to think. It's interesting to say when certain people have total brain damage, so you can't relate to them. But when people have partial brain damage, in other words, they have a vessel for certain, for example, partial brain, apparently, certain vaccine injury. So they have partial brain damage. They call it autism, but it's really just brain damage, partial brain damage. So the person has a brain that functions, but there's actual physical damage to the hardware of the brain. So the person has a difficulty, social difficulty with other people, doesn't relate. However, a very interesting thing happens that sometimes their essential ability to think becomes revealed, and even though they don't have a proper hardware, so like they can understand some of these children or people understand things like regular souls understand, and um, they leak out things that souls understand by themselves. So they have this incredible understanding of the reality of the world, of the reality of the spiritual world. But because they have hardware damage, they don't have social skills. So basically, we have this tremendous potential of ideas and understandings and insight, and we can understand spiritual things. And what our hardware does, it basically focuses our thinking only onto the things that we put effort on. But we need to understand that we have much more potential, even though a person understands only a specific thing, they have much more potential. Even a child that it seems not to be so intelligent, really the spiritual understanding is just as deep as yours, perhaps even more, because it wasn't that long ago when they were in heaven, understanding spiritual things way beyond um, human comprehension, and they still have a little bit of that intuition, hasn't been rubbed away through time in this world. It's just that their intuition of their great spiritual understanding doesn't really interface with the hardware of their brain, because they need effort, study, effort, learning, um, in order for their thinking to actually interface with their brain. But we got to know that there's there, the Shara Bahelim. It's dwelling over there. It's there. We just don't see it. So again, this is another metaphor that there's much more to the world which we don't see. So that's the full metaphor. Metaphor number one was the idea of when a person teaches a student in very short, a concept in short, the teacher knows the entire concept with all its details. The student doesn't, but in the teacher, it's revealed in him all the details, so that when we look at the world, there's really much more to it the same way. Second metaphor which we used this time was the metaphor of life in a life of a soul that gives that the interfaces with the hardware of the body in order to give life to the body. And even if a person's missing a certain, let's say, God forbid, if they're missing the ability to see, the spiritual ability to see is still there. They're able to give birth to children that can see, because that spiritual ability is still there. So too, there's much more to the world which we don't know, which we can't see. And the similar idea of the power of growth from the ground. There's this spiritual power in the ground, and all the seed that it does is just focuses this unlimited power. Then, so that's like two little metaphors, but now the third metaphor was the power of movement. The potential of movement is there, even when you see only a specific movement. And then the fourth metaphor was the ability to think in a to think and to understand things beyond human comprehension. It's right there, but it's there in everybody's brain. It's in the kayacha muscle. It's in the liquid around the brain that goes down the spinal cord. But um, but a person with the only thing that gets revealed is what people put effort into thinking about. So we did it. These are the four metaphors. We compare the metaphors to each other. That would be his Hisbaininus, which we've been speaking about. We're very excited to be able to do that. What you could do is you could write down these four metaphors and compare them to each other on a piece of paper, and that would be his Hisbaininus. And doing that would it's something that helps being able to pray, to be able to direct your prayer to the essence of God and nothing from this world. It says in Shulchan Aruch chapter 9, Shulchan Aruch, the laws of day-to-day life, chapter 98, that before a person prays, we have to think about the loftiness of God and the lowliness of man, and to take away the pleasures of man from your heart. Well, if the pleasures of man are like nothing compared to what's really out there, so obviously we would take it out. Why should we focus on that? If the lowliness of man, well, it's automatically understood. If we just think about the greatness of God, if we think about these metaphors and realize that God is something so much greater, so um, so it would help us direct our prayers to God and ask for the appropriate things. Now what we're going to do is we're going to understand the Rishimu, the logo. We said that after the Tzimtzum, the first thing that God allows that to remain is this Rishimu. It's like the signature. It's like you draw on the sand and the water comes the first time, the wave comes and it almost erases everything that you did before, but there's still a remnant of what was before. That's another metaphor from the word. What does the Hebrew word Rishimu mean? Rishimu, logo, Rishimu, signature. Rishimu really is when you draw in the sand and the wave comes and it's almost erased what was there before, but you can still see the evidence. So all of creation is created from this evidence. So let's learn a few metaphors to really understand what it is. Vinyana meral b'chinas istalkos behelem v'en. So again, we're learning the Rishimu, which is the first thing after the contraction, after the Tzimtzum. The Rishimu is like this logo, like the signature, like this evidence of a little bit of an evidence of what was before the Tzimtzum. And 1 second, I can't. Here it is. Shenyona meral bechinas istalkos behelem v'lenishar ma'akol rak reishem. Everything like hid itself, and the only thing that remains is just like a little bit of evidence, like the sea, the wave wipes off what you wrote on the sand. Now, we'll be able to understand the Rishimu the way it works from other metaphor. The Moy Roshim Sha'isa Uman Shiachul Asaisa Binyan Bekitzer. So Roshim Sha'isa Uman Shiachul Asaisa Binyan. This is a writing that a professional architect or builder, contractor makes in order that he should be able to make a building Bekitzer Kav Zeh. Shibareshem Shekel. Reb David, your picture is on the main screen, and is it possible to put my picture better on the? Can you make my picture on the the text, because it's like small on the corner and I'm not able to really set it up right. Yeah, but then I can't read it. It's blocking my vision. Reb David. Let's see if oh, better. Okay, now I can do it. Yeah. So basically, all the the big story of building the building is in this Kitzur Reshim Zeh. Basically, it is a plan which is a small micro of the big building with a ruler. So with a ruler, he writes down on a piece of paper what's going to be the bigger picture. So that's what the Rishiba, that's a first metaphor, is basically a plan. God in the Rishimu, he has a mini plan of the entire world, every single detail. Metaphor number one. Metaphor number two is like this. Oy Kamosha Isel is Hanikra Ois. Sheina Ois Inyan Hashayach Letzama Inyan Rak Lezikorin Be'alma. So, or he's making a letter, and a letter has no connection to the actual what's going to be built. It's only to remind him. For example, make for yourself tzionim. You know, in the military and in the Gemara, you'll notice in the Gemara, it was people used to learn the Gemara of Bahat. They still do, and they have these acronyms to be able to remember the discussion of the Gemara. So in the military, they have, how do you teach 18-year-olds to do complicated tasks on a high level of competence? They learn acronyms, and each letter in the acronym has a whole protocol of behavior, right? So this is what it is. So, and then he says, now he says, let's compare metaphors. This is his bonus. Let's compare. This second one is more hidden from the idea of the first metaphor that we discussed in the previous page, which is the idea of a kitzur halacha, a small halacha, a small law that holds in it all the details, that the teacher sees all the details, but the student doesn't. It's like a person who writes an article, they see all the details of the article in the headline. But if you give an acronym to people, it's more hidden. Imagine if a writer only gave an acronym, like a military acronym, in the newspaper. Nobody will be able to understand anything. Of course, the writer understands, the military people understand. So he's saying that that the Rishima is in a way more of a concealment than even the Tzimtzum. See, when you have a headline, somehow that kitzur, that shortened version of the entire article, has a connection to the longer article. But imagine if it was an acronym, but the letters don't even fit to the lesson. It's like a code. Well, that's what the Rishimla is. It's more of a code. So the first metaphor is a plan. And he says, no, there's the deeper understanding. It's more like a code, that the writer sees everything, but the reader really does not see anything in the code. Now, third metaphor, the third way to understand the Rishimul, the logo, Zu, Shu Mera Inyan Atzimtzum, the Helem Harbe Yeser, which this shows even a greater contraction and a greater concealment. Vukamaya Zerek Evan, it's like throwing a stone. Shukayach ala Melech said that the energy that's moving the stone, Nivdal min ha'etzem, is separated from the essence, the hand that threw it. Vim kol zeh, nevertheless, kol kayach atnua, the entire movement of the stone, melubish ba, is enclosed in it, behelim, in a hidden way. Ach shu berichuk nivdal yeseh. However, it's a big distance from his power in his hand. In other words, when you throw a stone, the momentum of the power of the hand is still in the stone when the stone is far away, but people can't see, might not be able to see which hand threw the stone. Remember, we used the metaphor in the previous page for tzimtzum is the actual movement of the hand. Is actually moving the bat. So the energy is enclosed in a revealed way in the bat, the geshem, the yeser, on the hand that's moving. But we're saying that for the Rishimo, It's more like you threw a stone. You don't even see that power of the hand, the momentum of the hand, even though the momentum of the hand is there, but you don't see it. So the momentum of God is here in the world. We just don't see it. The point of the Rishim was to show how much concealment there is. The metaphors show more and more concealment. One is an architectural plan. The second one is just like a letter or code. The third one is like throwing a stone, and you don't see who threw the stone. Now the fourth metaphor is showing even a greater concealment. Gamiza even more than the previous one. It's similar to the second metaphor, where the fellow is only writing some code, some letter, to remind him what he needs to do. It's a person making a hand gesture to a deep intellectual concept. Shenivdal, now we see a major transformation similar to the transformation of the code, because the code has nothing to do with the actuality, what the code is teaching us. You don't see the connection to the same thing. The hand gesture is symbolizing a big, deep idea. Shenivdal atnua agashmi ma'aseichel haruchni. The physical movement of the hand gesture is very distant from the actual spiritual understanding. Nevertheless, the student understands the intellect from it. That was the fourth metaphor. So I heard they did a study. What is a study? A study is basically an organized observation of reality. So they had two groups of students, and both groups of students, average students. One group, the teacher taught them a math problem, and the second group, the teacher did a hand gesture at the end. And then they tested both students. And the students that saw the hand gesture got better marks, they understood it better, and they recalled the problem much better to the students that just listened without seeing the hand gesture of the teacher. So the hand gesture helps in understanding. Nevertheless, it's very hard to see the deep understanding from the hand gesture. This is a physical movement, and that's a spiritual idea. But now let's get to the fifth metaphor. The fifth metaphor is even more, you see, even more of a distance. It's the movement of hands writing. In other words, this is a double concealment, and it's a qualitative concealment, because there's an idea, and the idea is already hinted with what's on the paper, with the words on the paper. But then what we're analyzing is only the movement of the hand writing the words of the paper. Movement of the hand. It's in a totally different domain than the idea. This is physical movement in this physical world. And then there's an idea. So it's a double concealment. One, the idea to the written word, to the written letters, and from the written letters to the movement of the hand. Go figure. Go figure it out. From the movement of the hand, we get to a written letter, and from the written letter to the deep idea. So this world is really, if you use that metaphor to this world, it's a double concealment. This world, this physical world, conceals to something else, and that something else it hints to something totally different. And yet they're connected, because the master can decipher from the movement of the hand with the whole entire story. This fifth metaphor is explained in another place at length. Now we're comparing metaphor. Each one is showing on a greater distance, but they all have one message. They're all going in one way. Canal. Because the essence remains hidden. However, it is included in this signature or logo, in this dot. Everything's there. So that is our world. Everything's here, but it's just like layers of concealment. But from the perspective of God, he sees everything. From our perspective, we see a world that covers up. We only see a drop. Nevertheless, once we're aware of this, we know that our attention when we pray goes to something far deeper, to the essence of God. And we're going to leave it at this for this week. We completed chapter 12. And next week, we're actually going to make more impact because we're actually going to focus on the lesson. This only, so we remember, part of the skills are you learn a metaphor that only affects the left brain. But when we learn the lesson of the metaphor, we need to use more intuition, more of the right brain. And this connects us, this gives us the impact of our soul. This gives us the nimshal gives us the humility. So what we learned this week, when we understand it, gives us satisfaction, happiness. But we want to also get to the other side. We want to get the humility, and that we're going to get from next week.